Savo, north outskirts, late afternoon. A dog lay still near the bend in the mountain road, half sunk into the crusted snow that curled where the gravel shoulder ended. His body was slumped at an angle, ribs sharp under a patchy coat darkened by frost. One leg extended unnaturally. There was no barking, no sound of distress, just a stillness that made the ranger slow his vehicle without thought. He stepped out carefully, boots crunching across the packed edge, wind brushing against his sleeves. The dog didn't react. Only a faint steam rose from the animal's side, each breath so shallow it vanished before reaching the cold air. The ranger's name was Kamau. He had seen injured animals before, snared warthogs, limping jackals, even a cheetah cub once that had hidden under a fence line for a full day before they found it. But this was different. Domestic. Forgotten. The dog's eyes were half closed, snow flecked into the fur around his muzzle. A small pink patch showed where the skin had cracked above his nose. He did not flinch when Kamau stepped closer. He did not lift his head. That stillness was the first danger, not aggression, but the silence of surrender. Kamau crouched, no collar. The fur along the spine was matted into long ridges of frozen mud. One ear was torn near the edge, raw but not fresh. The pads of the dog's paws were split from cold exposure, one leaking a thin trail of blood into the snow. Kamau extended one hand slowly, palm open. No sound came from the dog, but his nostrils quivered once, then again. The first movement. He unzipped his jacket halfway and pulled a thermal blanket from the truck's emergency kit. Unfolding it slowly, he laid it across the dog's back, careful not to press. The dog stirred faintly, eyes flickering toward Kamau's boots. His breath caught once and then resumed. Not deeper, but more aware. Kamau placed a gloved hand lightly behind the dog's front shoulder. "Still with us?" he murmured. The wind cut harder across the ridge, lifting loose snow into brief swirls. If they stayed exposed, the cold would claim him within the hour. The ranger checked his surroundings. No houses, no tire tracks, no prints in the snow but his own. Whoever left the dog had done so carefully, perhaps even from a moving vehicle. No sign of food, no shallow dig marks. The dog hadn't tried to move in hours. His leg, the back one, was likely fractured or dislocated. Even if warmth returned, he couldn't walk on it. Kamau knew what that meant. If they left him here, he'd die. If they moved him, he might still die. Shock, cold, internal injury, but doing nothing was a guarantee. He lifted the blanket's edges gently. The dog's body remained limp, but his ears shifted once, a faint tilt toward Kamau's voice. The ranger took that as the smallest kind of permission. He slid both arms beneath the torso, carefully under the ribs, lifting as evenly as possible. The weight was less than expected. Bone-light. As the body lifted, the dog let out a low, involuntary moan. Not pain, but the sound of air escaping. His eyes opened fully then, just for a second. Brown, clouded, but present. Kamau carried him to the truck, one step at a time. Behind them, the wind erased their trail, sweeping fresh snow across the old marks. The ridge fell silent again. A roadside, a body. And now only the imprint where he had lain. Shallow, uneven, already fading. The dog's body shifted only slightly in Kamau's arms as he moved toward the truck. The weight felt loose and uneven, as if it belonged more to a bundle of cloth than a living animal. Inside the vehicle, the air was cold but drier than outside. Kamau laid the blanket-wrapped body gently across the passenger seat, pausing to tuck the frayed edges beneath the dog's limbs. The breath was still there, shallow, stuttering, but present. His jaw hung slightly open, the gums pale and tacky. No sound came, just the faintest rise and fall of his chest, irregular and slowing. Kamau turned on the heating system, angled the vents toward the seat, and unzipped the outer layer of his jacket to wrap it beneath the dog's flank. The fur along the side was frozen in thick ridges where snow had melted and refrozen again. His tail was tucked beneath him, but barely. The paws, now exposed under the blanket's loosened edge, showed deep fissures across the pads, red, dry, some crusted with ice. One paw had torn entirely between the toes, likely from walking too far across crusted snow or jagged gravel. The blood had stopped flowing, but the wound gaped slightly with every pulse of shallow breath. The ranger took a small syringe of lukewarm electrolyte fluid from his side kit and lifted the dog's head with care. The jaw sagged with the motion. When he placed a drop at the corner of the lips, the dog gave no reaction. The second drop, however, disappeared slowly inward. Not swallowed, absorbed. That was something. Hypothermia did not leave much room for error. If the core temperature didn't begin to rise within the hour, the body would begin shutting down organs permanently. His ears were already cold and stiff to the touch. One twitched faintly when Kamau adjusted the blanket again. Outside, snow continued to fall in soft, tilted lines, the kind that blurred the ridgeline and narrowed visibility with every passing minute. Kamau checked the time, then looked down. The dog's eyes were barely open, glassy but not fully shut, breathing, still. "We've got you," he said softly. It was the only thing he could think to say. His voice barely registered above the heater's hum. The dog didn't respond, but his brow moved. A slight, involuntary contraction, as though something in the brain registered the sound. As the vehicle moved forward along the icy trail, Kamau kept one hand near the blanket. Each minute was fragile. If the dog vomited or convulsed, it could mean brain damage. If his temperature dropped further, his heart might stop. If they hit a bump too hard, the pain from the torn paw or the likely hip injury could send him into shock. Every breath the dog took was earned, not assumed. The cold didn't forgive delay. 10 minutes later, the dog's side began rising more evenly, still shallow, but with rhythm. Kamau slowed the truck slightly, reading the signals without celebrating. The dog's tongue showed briefly, dry and cracked, then disappeared. Another sign of response. His body remained curled, tight and defensive, but a single paw extended forward again, the same one torn open. The limb trembled from strain, then relaxed. At the edge of the forest road where snow gave way to low scrubland, Kamau pressed the horn once. Not for traffic, just for sound. A kind of small ritual, announcing that one life was still being carried forward, not left behind. The road ahead would lead them to shelter, heat, gauze, water, but only if the breathing kept coming. Behind them, the wind smoothed the drifts once more. Nothing marked where the dog had fallen. Only the soft, rattling breath inside the cabin said he hadn't disappeared into the cold completely. Not yet. Kamau kept the truck moving gently over the snow-crusted road, tires whispering against packed ice as the forest line thinned. The old ranger outpost stood where the last trees gave way to rock and slope, a one-room shelter with a generator, a stove, and enough supplies to weather short storms. He parked close to the sidewall, then turned the engine off. For a moment, neither of them moved. The heater had warmed the cabin slightly, but the air inside still felt hollow, like it hadn't been breathed in properly for hours. Kamau looked at the bundle beside him. The dog's head rested against the folded coat, one eye partly open. The breaths came slow and uneven, but they came. He opened the door, bracing against the wind that swept across the clearing. With both arms, he lifted the dog again. The body felt warmer now, the blanket softening against skin that no longer crackled with frost. But weight alone didn't mean survival. The dog didn't lift his head. He made no sound. Only a slight tension remained in the muscles near the ribs, the kind that holds on for no reason but instinct. Kamau moved with care, one step at a time, boots sinking slightly into the drifted snow. Inside, the outpost was dim but warmer. The old stove had been lit that morning, and its heat still lingered faintly along the floorboards. He laid the dog onto a folded tarp beside the stove and adjusted the blanket. The warmth here was steady, dry. He placed a bowl of room-temperature water near the dog's mouth. The dog's ear twitched, slow and confused. His nose flared once, then again, as if trying to smell through a wall of fog. Kamau dripped water onto his tongue. This time, the mouth moved faintly. The tip of the tongue flicked outward, catching the edge of the drop before falling back. It wasn't a full response, but it meant the body hadn't closed down completely. Kamau wrapped another cloth around the hind legs. The torn paw still bled, but only in small pulses. A fracture was likely. The limb didn't respond to touch, but neither did its spasm. A quiet sign that the worst pain was dulled for now. The ranger checked his pulse. Slow, erratic, but there. He stayed crouched for a while, letting his hand rest near the dog's shoulder without touching. The animal's breathing began to settle. Still shallow, still dangerous. But there was rhythm. The body wasn't giving up yet. As the hours passed, the dog shifted once, barely a twitch along the spine, a stretch of one paw, then stillness again. The warmth was beginning to do its work. Hypothermia could reverse slowly with consistent care, but the danger hadn't passed. If the internal organs had slowed too far, they could still fail. If infection set in from the paw wound, fever would follow. Kamau checked the leg again, wrapping it in gauze now that the bleeding had stopped. The dog made no protest. His body accepted the help, not from trust, but from absence of strength. Night settled outside. Wind moved across the old wood beams, soft and constant. Inside, the only sound was the breathing. Shallow, wet, but steady. Kamau leaned back and sat near the stove, legs out, watching the rise and fall of the dog's side. He whispered once, "You're almost there." The dog didn't lift his head, but his ears moved faintly. In the stillness, that gesture carried weight. Nothing else was asked of him. The fight had begun quietly from the inside. Just air, lungs, and something in the body refusing to end. The fire in the stove cracked softly. Across the floor, the dog's paw slid forward half an inch, enough to press gently against the edge of the tarp. Not seeking, not resisting, just closer to the heat. The heat from the stove had settled low across the outpost floor, brushing against the tarp where the dog lay. Kamau had kept the fire fed, small branches placed one by one, never letting the room grow too warm too fast. Cold could not be chased out all at once, not from the body of an animal pulled from a snowbank. Slow warming was the only safe way. A shock to the system could stop the heart before anything else had a chance to recover. For now, the dog remained still. Eyes closed, legs curled close to the belly, breath shallow and dry. Every few minutes, Kamau leaned forward, checking for the rise in the ribs, counting each one with quiet care. Time passed without change. The snow outside fell slower now, heavier flakes moving sideways across the glass. The world narrowed to this room, the stove, the tarp, and the narrow space between survival and retreat. Kamau cleaned the dog's torn paw again, wrapping the gauze more securely this time. No protest came. The dog's jaw remained slack, a line of moisture now drying against the edge of his lip. The fur beneath the blanket was softer than before, not thawed fully but no longer stiff. That, too, counted. By nightfall, the dog had not moved. No shift of ear, no twitch of leg. The pulse along his neck was slow enough to be missed if Kamau hadn't been watching. And yet, the breath continued. Even now, there was no certainty. Dogs left out in these temperatures for more than a few hours often suffered from internal complications. Slow organ damage, neurological shifts, circulation collapse. Nothing could be known yet. The only thing Kamau could do was wait. He placed a small bowl of diluted broth near the blanket, its steam rising faintly into the still air. The scent reached the dog within minutes. A subtle change came then. Not a rise of the head or a sudden alertness, but a slight wrinkle along the nose. A flex of the nostrils, brief and unsure. Then stillness again. Kamau watched in silence, letting the moment pass without interference. If the dog moved toward it, he would know. If not, he would not push. 2 more hours passed. The blanket had shifted slightly from the dog's shoulder, exposing the edge of the torn ear. Kamau replaced it gently. The cloth caught slightly on a patch of dried fur, and the dog's back leg twitched once, just a fraction of movement like a wire pulled under the surface. Kamau froze. Nothing followed, but a few minutes later another tremor came. This time from the tail. Not a wag, not even a lift. Just a faint involuntary flinch that caused the edge to rise and fall once before resting again. It was the first undeniable sign. The nervous system had begun to reawaken. The tail, often last to go numb in cold, often first to return. Kamau whispered, "That's it." More to the room than to the dog. His voice stayed low, barely present. The fire shifted with a soft crack. Outside, the snow had begun to slow. Kamau didn't reach for the dog again. He let him lie untouched. The body knew how to do its part. It only needed time, warmth, stillness, and quiet. All the other interventions had already been made. For now, movement would only matter if it came from the dog himself. Just before midnight, as the wind eased outside and the room deepened into silence, the dog shifted one paw beneath the blanket. Then nothing. A second gesture that meant something old in the body had remembered how to respond. Kamau closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound of breath and fire merge into the same slow rhythm. The blanket moved again. A single tremble, soft and small. Enough to keep hoping. The warmth inside the outpost held steady as dawn crept in. Outside, the snowfall had slowed to a quiet dusting, softening the ridges of wind-packed drifts along the slope. Inside, Kamau moved with quiet intention. The fire had burned through most of the night, and the dog remained where he had been placed, wrapped in 2 layers of cloth, now damp in patches where body heat had finally begun to return. His limbs still trembled occasionally, not with strength, but with the fragile pulse of circulation reawakening. The torn paw had stopped bleeding. The edges of the wound looked raw but dry, a good sign for clotting. Every hour of stillness without regression was another small gain against the damage the cold had done. Kamau knelt beside the dog with a tin bowl of warmed water and a small square of cloth. He dipped and wrung it out carefully, checking the temperature before pressing it lightly to the animal's flank. The fur, once hardened with ice, had softened into long, uneven clumps, stained by dirt, old blood, and weeks of neglect. Kamau worked in slow, methodical lines, not trying to clean for appearance, only for health. Infection could hide beneath the matted patches. Skin damage could go unnoticed beneath dirt. He moved from the belly to the ribs, from the ribs to the back, always pausing between each pass to check for flinching or change in breath. As he moved toward the dog's neck, the cloth caught, not on fur or bone, but something resistant and smooth beneath the outer coat. Kamau stopped. With both hands he parted the fur gently. There, under a crusted layer of hair and frost, the edge of leather showed, cracked, rigid, almost fused to the skin. A collar. He soaked another cloth and pressed it around the edge, melting the ice that had sealed it in place. It took several minutes before it loosened enough to shift. The leather was brittle in some places, soft in others, but still intact. Kamau turned it slowly, checking for buckles, for damage, for tags. There was no metal, just a faint indentation on the inner side, pressed deep into the leather's surface. He brought it closer to the window light. A name. Not scratched in, not written with ink. Embossed, likely when the collar was new. Only 5 letters, simple, clear. It was a name, not a number, not a mark. Someone had named this dog. Someone had once claimed him, fed him, placed this collar around his neck with care. The fact changed nothing and yet everything. Kamau folded the collar once and placed it on the table. He returned to the dog, whose breath remained low but even. His ears shifted faintly at the ranger's steps. No alertness, no tension, just subtle responses, sensory nerves working again. What stood at risk now was no longer just the dog's ability to survive, but the unknown story that might lie behind him. A name meant history. A collar meant intention. But it didn't mean return. Kamau had seen it before. Dogs left behind during moves, accidents, changes too quiet or painful to explain. Sometimes they wandered off and no one came looking. Sometimes they were left and no one dared admit it. He lifted the dog's front leg gently to check the ribs again. The skin there was healing where frostbite had begun to rise. The fur would take longer. Under the blanket, the tail moved once. Just a soft adjustment, nothing more. Kamau watched him settle back into stillness. The collar rested beside the stove now, its edges dry. The letters remained. Not a mystery, exactly. Just a piece of something unfinished. The dog didn't know what had been found. He didn't stir when Kamau knelt again. But the breath continued. Slow, even, fragile. Through the small window, the snow began to taper off completely, leaving only a dull gray light over the ridge and a stillness inside the room that held the weight of something almost remembered. By the third morning, the storm had passed completely. A dull blue light spread across the snowfield outside the outpost, flattening the hills beneath a wide, unbroken sky. The world looked cleaner than it had days before, though nothing inside the shelter had changed quickly. The dog still lay by the stove, legs drawn beneath him, eyes half-lidded. His breath had grown stronger, more regular, but he remained quiet, eating only when food was brought close and moving only in small, deliberate shifts. The gauze on his paw had darkened with blood overnight. Kamau replaced it gently, cleaning around the edges with the same steady care, saying nothing as he worked. That afternoon, Kamau switched on the radio. The signal was thin, crackling across 2 channels before holding steady on the third. He called in coordinates, described the collar, gave the name carved in leather. There was no urgency in his voice, only routine. Names got lost. Dogs wandered too far. He knew better than to expect a quick reply. By nightfall, no one had answered. The next day passed slowly. The wind had quieted, but the air remained sharp. Kamau stepped outside only to fetch more wood and check the slope for new prints. There were none. Inside, the dog shifted more often now, his body stretching once before curling back again. That evening, he raised his head fully for the first time, looked around the room, then lowered it without moving his legs. A small sign, but a real one. The ranger continued radioing in the mornings and once again near dusk. Always the same description, always the same pause afterward. The silence on the other end wasn't cruel, just familiar. In some regions, animals passed between towns like wind passed through the hills, known for a season, then gone. A collar didn't guarantee a reunion. It only meant there had once been one. On the 5th morning, the dog stood. Not for long. His hind leg shook under the weight and he dropped back down before Kamau could reach him, but he had lifted himself fully. It took effort. His ribs tightened. His nose stayed low to the ground, sniffing once at the tarp, then toward the stove, then toward the door. Kamau didn't interfere. The movement itself was the thing. Recovery had to come in the dog's time. By evening, he stood again, this time longer. Kamau placed a bowl of soft food nearby and turned away. Minutes later, the bowl was empty. It happened without witness, without prompting, only the simple act of hunger remembering itself. On the seventh day, Kamau left the door cracked open while tending to the stove. Cold air pushed inward in light bursts. The dog rose slowly, walked across the room, and stopped near the open gap. He didn't leave, just sat, body leaned slightly to one side and stared out at the snow. His ears moved once, not toward Kamau, but toward the slope, toward something the ranger couldn't see. He stayed there for nearly an hour. Kamau said nothing. The bowl was filled again and left beside the wall. At dusk, the dog turned from the door and walked back to the blanket. He lowered himself slowly, breathing steady, eyes not fully closed. That night he didn't sleep near the stove, but closer to the threshold, not for warmth, but for watching. In the morning, when Kamau opened the door again, the dog was already waiting beside it. The ranger stood to the side, letting the cold slip in. The dog stepped out once, paused, pressing into the crusted snow, then turned, walked a slow circle, and came back inside. There was no sound, no rush, just the soft prints behind him and the unbroken silence of the white hills beyond. The eighth morning came without wind. The trees along the far slope held still, their branches draped in heavy frost. Sunlight touched only the topmost tips, leaving the valley below in a gray hush. Kamau opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking once before quiet returned. The dog was already standing. He had risen with less effort that morning, moving from his blanket to the threshold in steady, even steps. He didn't look at Kamau. His head was turned toward the ridge. Kamau followed his gaze. For a while he saw only the slope, the same soft rise they'd watched for days, blanketed in unbroken snow. But then something shifted. Just beyond the far bend, where the ground dipped before rising again, a thin line of indentations cut through the crust. Not animal, not hooves. They were too even, too upright. Human. Not old either. The wind hadn't erased them yet. The edges were soft but present, shaped by a body moving carefully along the incline. Kamau stepped forward, one boot testing the top layer of the ice. The snow gave way under his weight, not deeply, but enough to slow him. He took a few paces, squinting into the glare. The trail wasn't long, 15, maybe 20 prints. Then it veered left, disappearing behind a rise of rock, not enough for a round trip. Whoever made them hadn't passed through. They had arrived. He looked back toward the outpost. The dog remained in the doorway, body quiet, head still lifted. His breath curled faintly into the morning air. Not alert, but aware. Kamau returned to his side, crouched low, and scanned the edges again. The prints were headed straight for them. Not perfect, but deliberate, as if someone had come to this place and stopped just short of knocking. There had been no vehicles, no distant sounds, no reply on the radio. But someone had walked across that snow, sometime in the last hours, close enough to be seen, close enough to leave intention behind. Kamau said nothing. He rested a hand on his thigh, eyes on the ridge. The dog stepped out then, not far, only a few feet past the door, and turned again to the slope. His ears moved forward. His hind leg, though healing, still wobbled slightly under pressure. But he stood longer this time. Posture straightened. He looked outward, then sat, not in the way of waiting, but in quiet anchoring. Kamau watched his body relax slowly, then stiffen again as the air shifted. What stood at risk now was not physical. The dog could walk. He could eat. His body was recovering. But there was something else, pressed in the prints on the hill and the stillness inside the animal. The collar, the name, the waiting. It had never been random. Kamau moved to the edge of the rise later that afternoon. The prints were clearer there, the weight of each step deeper in the soft drift. Small, not heavy. Possibly a child. Possibly someone walking with care. Not from panic, from purpose. But the trail ended abruptly at the flat stone shelf where the slope dropped into a frozen basin. No return prints, no gear, No sign of where the person had gone. Kamau marked the spot, turned back, and walked in silence. By dusk, the dog had not moved from the doorway. His body remained pointed toward the place the prince had come from. Not tense, not expectant, just present. The light faded behind the slope, pulling long shadows across the ridge. Cold moved back in with the dark, but the dog did not retreat inside. Kamau didn't call him. He left the door cracked as it was, the stove low, the air still warm enough to carry through the night. Behind him, the prince on the hill faded inch by inch as wind returned. But the dog stayed, watching, even after the trail was gone. The wind carried new scent that morning. Not the dry sharpness of pine or snow, but the faint trace of fabric, oil, and warmth, the kind that clung to human skin. Kamau noticed it first when he stepped outside to check the ridge. The trail from days earlier had long faded. The snow had crusted over, hardened by sun and cold, but now there were tracks again. Fresh ones. Tire marks curved off the slope just past the frozen rise. 2 sets of footprints led from the edge to the door. One large, one small. Kamau paused for a moment, then turned back toward the outpost without speaking. Inside, the dog stood near the door, as he had for days, body angled toward the window, eyes steady. His tail did not wag. His ears did not perk. But something had shifted in his stance, a kind of held breath that stayed locked in the body, not out of fear, but out of waiting. Kamau opened the door. The dog stepped forward once, slow, then paused again. His body leaned into the cold with less hesitation than before. Down the slope, a man approached. He was thick-shouldered, dressed in farm wear that had been patched along the sleeves and knees. In his arms, he held a boy. Small, bundled in a scarf that covered half his face, hands hidden beneath sleeves too long. The man's steps were cautious, not because of the ice, but because of what walked toward him. The dog limped forward. The wound on his paw had sealed into a tight, pale scar, still sensitive. Each step left a deeper mark than the last. He did not run. He did not bark. But a low sound rose in his throat, thin, breathless, not from pain. A whine, short, broken, then swallowed back. It wasn't a call, it was something smaller, the kind of sound that slips out when memory stirs before the body understands it. The boy slid down from his father's arms and took a step forward, boots crunching in the snow. He didn't shout. He didn't reach. His eyes stayed locked on the dog, wide and quiet. Kamau remained behind, one hand resting on the doorframe. No one moved to interrupt. No words came. The boy crouched. The dog paused, only feet away now. He shifted his weight, front leg steady, back leg trembling slightly with strain. Another small step, then another. The boy lowered his scarf just enough for his mouth to show. His lips moved, and from them came one soft word. A name. The same name Kamau had read days ago on the inside of the frozen leather collar. The dog limped forward and pressed his head gently into the boy's chest. No bark, no sound. Just contact. The boy's hands came up slowly, one resting behind the dog's ear, the other beneath his chin. His fingers touched fur that was still uneven, still recovering, but it was warm now. It moved under touch. Kamau looked away then, not out of privacy, but to give the moment its weight. He walked back inside and left the door open. Behind him, the wind shifted once through the trees, lifting loose snow into brief spirals. The man remained still, arms folded, eyes watching his son. The boy whispered the name again. This time, he didn't have to say it loud. The dog remained close, unmoving. His body leaned fully into the boy's knees. He didn't check the air. He didn't turn his head. The waiting had ended, and with it, the distance between them. Nothing needed to be said. Above them, a light breeze carried the snow gently across the ridge, soft enough not to disturb the tracks already made. In the stillness, the sound of the dog's breath, even and slow, matched the rhythm of the wind.